Maya Rodriguez was just the quiet medic who bandaged scraped knuckles and handed out aspirin. The tough infantry soldiers called her Med Tent Girl, and joked she'd panic if bullets started flying. Then came the ambush that left 4 men bleeding to death, and Maya had to prove them all wrong. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The desert wind carried dust and diesel fumes across Forward Operating Base Bravo, a collection of concrete barriers and canvas structures that served as humanity's foothold in hostile territory. In the air-conditioned sanctuary of the medical tent, Sergeant Maya Rodriguez worked with quiet precision, her small hands steady as she wrapped a sprained ankle. The young soldier she was treating shifted uncomfortably, more from embarrassment than pain. "Keep weight off it for 48 hours, Maya instructed, her voice soft but authoritative. "If the swelling doesn't go down, come see me." The soldier mumbled his thanks and limped out, leaving Maya to return to her endless inventory of medical supplies. Each gauze pad, each saline bag, each morphine ampoule had its designated place in her meticulously organized world. Staff Sergeant Rick Torres burst through the tent flaps with his usual swagger, followed by Corporal Jake Morrison and Private Danny Walsh. All 3 bore the marks of a recent altercation: scraped knuckles, split lips, and the satisfied grins of men who'd won a fight. Torres, a barrel-chested veteran with arms like tree trunks, dropped heavily onto the examination table. "Our Florence Nightingale still playing nurse?" he asked, flexing his bruised knuckles. Maya didn't look up from her supply cabinet, accustomed to the casual dismissal in his tone. "What do you need?" she replied, pulling on latex gloves with practiced efficiency. "Got into it with some locals at Checkpoint Charlie. Nothing serious." Torres held out his hands, displaying knuckles that were scraped raw and already showing signs of swelling. Maya examined the wounds with professional detachment, noting the telltale crescent-shaped cuts. "You'll need antibiotics. Human bites are dirtier than dog bites." Her diagnosis was matter-of-fact, delivered without judgment or reproach. Morrison snorted with laughter. "Hear that, Sarge? You're dirtier than a dog." Torres shot him a warning look before turning back to Maya. "Just slap a Band-Aid on it, sweetheart. Save the real medicine for the real soldiers." His words carried the casual condescension that had become background noise in Maya's daily routine. "Infection doesn't care about your rank," she replied evenly, preparing an antibiotic packet. "Take the pills or don't, your choice." Her tone remained professional, betraying none of the frustration that simmered beneath the surface. Torres snatched the medication with deliberate roughness, exchanging meaningful looks with his companions. "Must be nice having the safest job in the war zone," he continued, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Air conditioning, clean sheets, no bullets flying." Walsh, the youngest of the group, grinned maliciously. "What's the scariest thing that happens in here, anyway? Running out of aspirin?" The 3 men laughed at their own wit, thoroughly pleased with their cleverness. Maya finished treating Morrison's split lip in silence, her movements becoming more rigid with each joke. When she handed him an ice pack, her grip was perhaps a bit tighter than necessary. "Apply this for 20 minutes, then 20 minutes off. Repeat as needed." "Thanks, Mom," Morrison said with exaggerated gratitude, causing another round of chuckling from his friends. As the trio prepared to leave, Torres paused at the tent entrance. "You know, Rodriguez, if you ever want to see what real combat looks like, we could always use another body to carry our packs." His offer was delivered with the kind of patronizing smile reserved for children and small animals. "I'll keep that in mind," Maya replied, her voice carefully neutral. The tent fell silent after their departure, leaving only the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of helicopter rotors. Maya returned to her inventory with renewed focus, each movement sharp and efficient. She had joined the army as a combat medic 5 years ago, completing the same grueling training as any infantry soldier, plus an additional 4 months of intensive medical instruction. She could perform emergency surgery in a combat zone, treat sucking chest wounds under fire, and carry a wounded soldier twice her weight to safety. But to the men of Bravo Company she was just the Med Tent Girl, a glorified nurse who handed out aspirin and sympathy. The next morning brought news of a supply convoy mission to the village of Kandahar Kala, a routine run through what intelligence deemed relatively secure territory. Maya was assigned to accompany the convoy as the medical support, standard procedure for any mission lasting more than a few hours. She packed her aid bag with the same methodical care she applied to everything else: trauma bandages, combat gauze, tourniquets, morphine auto-injectors, and a dozen other items that could mean the difference between life and death. The convoy consisted of 4 up-armored Humvees carrying medical supplies, ammunition, and fresh rations to an isolated checkpoint. Torres commanded the lead vehicle, his team including Morrison and Walsh. Maya rode in the third vehicle with Sergeant First Class Marcus Williams, a soft-spoken veteran who treated her with professional respect rather than paternal condescension. The first 2 hours of the mission passed without incident. The convoy wound through dusty valleys and rocky passes, past abandoned villages and goat herders who watched their passage with impassive eyes. Maya checked her equipment for the 100th time, a nervous habit that helped her stay focused during the long periods of enforced inactivity that characterized military life. The ambush came without warning, as they always did. One moment the convoy was navigating a narrow pass between two rocky hills, and the next, the world exploded in gunfire and flying metal. The distinctive crack of AK-47s echoed off the canyon walls, followed immediately by the deeper boom of an RPG impact. Maya's Humvee lurched violently to the left as the driver fought to maintain control. Contact left. Contact left. Williams screamed into his radio, his voice barely audible over the chaos of automatic weapons fire. We're taking heavy fire from the ridgeline. Maya braced herself against the vehicle's armor plating as bullets sparked off the reinforced glass. Through the narrow window, she could see muzzle flashes winking from concealed positions among the rocks. The enemy had chosen their killing ground well, a narrow pass with steep sides that offered no escape route and limited cover. The lead vehicle, Torres' Humvee, had taken the brunt of the initial assault. Smoke poured from its engine compartment, and Maya could see figures moving frantically inside. Her training kicked in automatically, suppressing the fear that threatened to paralyze her thoughts. This wasn't a training exercise or a simulation. This was real combat, and men were dying. I need to get to the casualties. Maya shouted over the din of gunfire. Williams looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. It's a kill zone out there, Rodriguez. You'll be cut to pieces before you make it 10 feet. Maya was already checking her aid bag, ensuring that all her equipment was secure. Those men need medical attention now. Every second we wait increases their chances of dying. Her voice carried a calm authority that seemed incongruous coming from someone the size of a high school student. Williams grabbed her shoulder as she reached for the door handle. Wait for covering fire. We'll suppress the ridgeline and you make your move. He keyed his radio with his free hand. All units, this is 3-6. We're providing covering fire for medical evacuation. Concentrate fire on the eastern ridge. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every weapon in the convoy opened up simultaneously, pouring lead into the rocky positions where the enemy muzzle flashes had appeared. The sound was deafening, a continuous roar of automatic weapons fire that seemed to shake the very mountains. Go. 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 Williams screamed and Maya threw open the door. The first step into the kill zone was the hardest. Every instinct screamed at her to stay in the relative safety of the armored vehicle, to wait for the infantry soldiers to clear the area before exposing herself to enemy fire. But the sight of Torres' burning Humvee, and the knowledge that wounded men were bleeding out inside it, overrode her survival instincts. Maya sprinted across the open ground in a low crouch, her aid bag bouncing against her hip. Bullets cracked overhead, some close enough that she could feel the supersonic shock waves. The distance to the lead vehicle seemed to stretch endlessly, each step taking her deeper into the enemy's crosshairs. She reached the Humvee just as a burst of automatic fire stitched across the ground where she had been standing a second earlier. The vehicle's armor was pockmarked with bullet impacts, and the front windshield had been completely shot out. Maya could hear moaning from inside. At least some of the occupants were still alive. The driver's door hung open, revealing Specialist Kevin Parks slumped over the steering wheel. Blood streamed from a head wound, but his chest was rising and falling regularly. Maya performed a rapid assessment, concussion, possible skull fracture, but his airway was clear and his pulse was strong. Park, can you hear me? Maya shouted over the gunfire. The young soldier's eyes fluttered open, unfocused but responsive. My head. I can't see straight, Park mumbled, trying to sit up. Maya gently but firmly pushed him back down. Stay down. You've got a head injury. I need to check the others. Maya moved to the passenger side, where she found Torres unconscious and bleeding heavily from his left leg. The bullet had shattered his femur, creating a compound fracture that was pumping arterial blood onto the floor of the vehicle. Without hesitation, Maya pulled a tourniquet from her aid bag and began the delicate process of stopping the hemorrhaging. The procedure required her to expose herself to enemy fire, half climbing into the vehicle to reach Torres' wounded leg. Bullets continued to spark off the Humvee's armor as she worked, but her training had taken over completely. The tourniquet was a relatively new piece of equipment, a far cry from the makeshift bandages and pressure points that medics had relied on in previous wars. Maya positioned it high on Tora's thigh, above the wound, and began tightening the windlass mechanism. The bleeding slowed, then stopped completely as the device compressed the femoral artery. Time of tourniquet application 1,347 hours, Maya announced to no one in particular, a habit drilled into her during medical training. Every procedure had to be documented, even in the middle of a firefight. A groan from the back seat drew her attention to Morrison and Walsh. Morrison was conscious but pale, clutching his right shoulder where a bullet had punched through his body armor. Walsh was worse, unconscious and barely breathing with a sucking chest wound that was causing his lung to collapse. Maya's mind automatically prioritized the casualties based on the severity of their injuries and their chances of survival. In the brutal calculus of battlefield medicine, not every wounded soldier could be saved, and resources had to be allocated to those with the best prospects for survival. Tora's leg wound was serious but not immediately life-threatening now that the bleeding was controlled. Park's head injury needed monitoring but wasn't critical. Morrison's shoulder wound was painful but not fatal. Walsh was dying. The private's chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow gasps, each breath more labored than the last. Pink foam bubbled from his lips, a sure sign that blood was filling his lungs. Maya had perhaps minutes to act before his collapsed lung killed him. "Morrison, can you hold pressure on your shoulder wound?" Maya asked, already moving toward Walsh. Morrison nodded weakly, using his good hand to press a field dressing against his injury. Maya quickly assessed Walsh's chest wound. The bullet had entered just below his left collarbone, creating a hole that was allowing air to enter his chest cavity. With each breath, more air was being trapped between his lung and chest wall, compressing the lung and preventing it from expanding properly. This was a tension pneumothorax, one of the most dangerous battlefield injuries. Without immediate treatment, the pressure in Walsh's chest would continue to build until it stopped his heart. Maya had seen it happen before during training exercises, a perfectly treatable injury that became fatal if not addressed within minutes. The treatment was as simple as it was terrifying. Maya needed to create a hole in Walsh's chest wall to relieve the pressure, essentially performing surgery with bullets flying overhead. She pulled a large-bore needle from her aid bag, a 14-gauge catheter designed specifically for this procedure. "This is going to hurt," Maya whispered to the unconscious soldier, though she doubted he could hear her. She located the correct anatomical landmarks by feel, her fingers tracing the spaces between Walsh's ribs. The insertion point needed to be precise, too high and she could damage major blood vessels, too low and she would miss the pleural space entirely. Maya positioned the needle at the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, exactly as she had practiced hundreds of times on training mannequins. The difference was that this time, there was no instructor watching over her shoulder, no safety net if she made a mistake. This was real and Danny Walsh's life depended on her getting it right the first time. The needle went in smoothly, meeting the expected resistance as it pierced skin, muscle, and finally the pleural membrane. There was a sudden hiss of escaping air, followed immediately by an improvement in Walsh's breathing. The tension pneumothorax was relieved, but Maya knew this was only a temporary fix. Walsh needed to be evacuated to a surgical facility as soon as possible. As Maya worked to secure the catheter in place, she became aware that the volume of gunfire had decreased significantly. The enemy's initial volley had been devastating, but the convoy's return fire was taking its toll on the attackers. She could hear Williams on the radio, calling for helicopter evacuation and close air support. "Med tent girl." Tora's voice was weak but coherent. Maya looked over to find the staff sergeant conscious and staring at her with an expression she had never seen before, respect mixed with something that might have been awe. "How are you feeling, Sergeant?" Maya asked, checking his pulse and pupil response. His vital signs were stable, though he had lost a significant amount of blood. "Like I got hit by a truck," Torres replied, trying to sit up. "But I'll live thanks to you." He paused, watching as Maya continued to monitor Walsh's breathing. "I owe you an apology, Rodriguez." "We all do." Before Maya could respond, the sound of incoming helicopters filled the air. 2 Black Hawks appeared over the canyon rim, their door gunners laying down suppressing fire as they descended toward the convoy. The cavalry had arrived, but Maya's work was far from over. The helicopter evacuation required careful coordination between the flight crews and the ground forces. Maya had to ensure that each casualty was properly stabilized for transport while simultaneously directing the aircraft to safe landing zones. Tora's leg wound required additional attention. Maya applied a pressure dressing over the entry wound and checked his distal pulse to ensure the tourniquet wasn't cutting off circulation completely. Morrison's shoulder wound needed to be repackaged with trauma gauze to control the bleeding during transport. Park's head injury required cervical spine immobilization in case of associated neck trauma. And Walsh needed constant monitoring of his chest decompression to ensure the catheter didn't become dislodged. As the first helicopter touched down, Maya found herself coordinating not just medical care but tactical movement as well. The landing zone was still within range of enemy small arms fire, requiring the casualties to be moved quickly and efficiently to minimize exposure. Torres and Walsh go first. Maya shouted over the rotor wash. Torres needs blood products, and Walsh needs immediate surgery. She helped load the stretchers, providing brief but comprehensive handoffs to the flight medics. 28-year-old male, GSW to left femur with femoral fracture and significant blood loss, Maya reported rapidly. Tourniquet applied to proximal thigh at 1,347 hours. Distal pulse present, patient responsive. For Walsh, the report was more complex. 22-year-old male, GSW to left chest resulting in tension pneumothorax. Needle decompression performed at second intercostal space, midclavicular line at 1,353 hours. Patient's breathing improved but requires immediate thoracic surgery. The flight medics nodded their understanding, impressed by the thoroughness of Maya's field treatment. As the first helicopter lifted off, Maya was already preparing Morrison and Park for evacuation on the second aircraft. The entire medical evacuation took less than 15 minutes, but in that time, Maya had performed procedures that would have challenged experienced trauma surgeons in a hospital setting. She had done it all while under enemy fire, in the confined space of a damaged vehicle, with improvised lighting and no assistance. As the second helicopter disappeared over the canyon rim, Williams approached Maya with an expression of profound respect. "Rodriguez, I've been in combat for 12 years and I've never seen anything like what you just did. You saved every one of those men's lives." Maya was checking her aid bag, taking inventory of her remaining supplies. "Just doing my job, Sergeant." "No," Williams said firmly. "What you did back there was extraordinary. Moving across open ground under fire, performing emergency surgery in a kill zone, that took more courage than most infantry soldiers will show in their entire careers." The ride back to base was subdued, with none of the usual banter that characterized successful missions. The surviving members of the convoy were processing what they had witnessed. The quiet medic they had dismissed as a support soldier had demonstrated a level of skill and bravery that put their own contributions to shame. Word of the ambush and Maya's heroic actions spread through the base within hours. The same soldiers who had mocked her gentle bedside manner now spoke of her in tones reserved for legendary warriors. Torres, calling from his hospital bed in Germany, made sure everyone knew that Maya Rodriguez had saved not just his life, but the lives of his entire crew. The transformation in how Maya was perceived was immediate and profound. No longer was she the med tent girl, who handed out aspirin and sympathy. She was now recognized as what she had always been, a highly trained combat professional whose skills were every bit as vital as those of the infantry soldiers who carried rifles. But perhaps the most significant change was in Maya herself. The quiet confidence that had always been present became more evident, backed by the knowledge that she had been tested under the most extreme circumstances and had not been found wanting. She continued to work in the medical tent with the same methodical precision, but now her fellow soldiers approached her with the respect due to a proven warrior. 3 weeks later, Maya received word that all 4 casualties from the ambush had made full recoveries. Torres would have a permanent limp from his shattered femur, but he would walk again. Morrison retained full use of his shoulder despite the bullet wound. Park's concussion had healed without lasting effects. And Walsh, whose collapsed lung had brought him within minutes of death, was already asking when he could return to duty. The medal citation would eventually read, "For exceptional valor and life-saving actions under enemy fire, demonstrating the highest traditions of military service and the medical corps." But for Maya, the greatest reward was simpler. The knowledge that 4 mothers would see their sons come home because she had been brave enough to run into the killing zone when they needed her most. In the end, the soldiers of Bravo Company learned a lesson that extended far beyond the mountains of Afghanistan. Courage isn't defined by the weapon you carry or the armor you wear. Sometimes it's found in a small medic with steady hands and an unshakable commitment to saving lives, even when it means risking her own. The med tent girl had shown them all what it truly meant to be a warrior.